Our top focus on the show. In a dramatic escalation of US-India trade tensions, US President Donald Trump has said rather added conditions to future India negotiations. Reports suggest that no trade talks are expected until Russian oil issue are resolved. Trump also denied any trade negotiations. Meanwhile, a sweeping wave of new tariffs from 10% to 50% on more than 60 countries is now reshaping global markets. Markets are reacting and India is fighting back.
Mr. President, just to follow up on the India tariffs, do you expect increased trade negotiations, since you've announced the 50% tariff?
No, not until we get it resolved.
From the Oval Office, President Trump has ruled out the possibility of increased trade negotiations with India, not until it gets resolved, after signing an executive order raising tariffs from 25% to 50%, effective on August 27th. New Delhi has labeled the move unfair, unjustified and unreasonable, accusing the US of double standards for targeting India, while other buyers of Russian oil, China, Turkey, remain untouched. Prime Minister Modi affirmed his willingness to bear the cost for farmers, fishermen and dairy workers, citing national interest and energy security. Across the globe, US tariffs are surging. A broad structure of 10% to 50% has taken effect against more than 60 countries, with major markets like Brazil, Switzerland facing steep penalties. The US average import tax now hovers around 18.6%, the highest since the 1930s. Global markets have taken notice. On August 1st, weak job data, just 73,000 jobs added in July and unemployment up to 4.2%. Alongside Trump's tariffs, it triggered a sell-off across Wall Street and global markets. Still, markets have recovered on bets of Federal Reserve rate cuts and strong earnings reports. Apple's investments helped buoy the sentiment, though concerns about inflation and supply chain upheaval persist. Experts warn that these tariffs could raise US consumer prices, disrupt global supply chains, and chill the economic growth. And well, for more on this, joining us live on Race to Power is Professor Andrew Latham, Distinguished Scholar of International Relations, Strategic Studies and Political Economy. Welcome to Race to Power, Mr. Latham. First up, Trump has clearly ruled out possibility of any trade negotiations with India, but he's rather kept it uncertain at this point of time. Your assessment first up.
Well, he's escalating clearly. He hasn't been able to get his way with India and with Prime Minister Modi in a way he did with Japan, for example, and the European Union, and even with Mexico and Canada. There are a few countries that have stood up to him, not because they're more morally virtuous, but because they have domestic political constituencies to look after. In India's case, the agricultural sector, dairy sector come to mind very, very quickly. So in the Indian case, Prime Minister Modi simply doesn't have negotiating, doesn't have any wiggle room to negotiate with him. And so he's standing up to Trump, and Trump is reacting the way in which a petulant child tends to react, which is he's thrown a bit of a tantrum. Now, I could put it charitably and say he's upping the ante, he's using what leverage he has, he's putting more pressure. But at the end of the day, he's not treating China like this, for example. And the United States also imports some things from Russia. So the Indian import of Russian oil can't be the sticking point here. It's broader than that.
Right, absolutely, Mr. Latham. And when asked to Trump about how US also has trade deals with Russia, he had nothing to say. My follow-up question to you is that, do you think Trump is using Russia as a leverage against India? And with New Delhi clearly standing up to Trump, does the US president actually have a plan in terms of how he's going to deal with India?
I think President Trump has two things in mind, one of which is he does want to deliver on his promise, albeit belatedly, to bring peace to Ukraine. And I think he sees the Indian piece there as leverage. If he can cut off Putin's oil sales to India, maybe that's more pressure on Putin. But I think there's a bigger thing going on here, which is in 1945, At the end of the Second World War, the United States built what was called the Bretton Woods system, basically a free trade system, the World Bank, the WTO, the GATT, things like that. And that had a good run from 1945 until the early 2020s, but now it's falling apart, partly because BRICS and China want to de-dollarize, which dollarization was a key part of that arrangement. So those rules, those norms, those institutions that the U.S. created after the Second World War and globalized after the Cold War, they're falling apart. And Trump has something to do with that, but it's bigger than Trump. It's simply falling apart. And he lacks the imagination to think of a new global trading order that's fair, that promotes peace and harmony, the way in which the Bretton Woods system did. What he sees in its place is a global hub and spoke system, with the United States being the hub and engaging in bilateral trade negotiations with all the other countries in the world. So multilateralism is out the window, being replaced by Americocentric bilateralism. Some countries have gone along with that.
Right.
But some countries, Brazil, China, and India have said, and Russia have said, absolutely not. We're not going along with that. And so that's where we are, turbulent times.
My last question to you, Professor Latham, how perhaps does all of this, because Trump has stalled negotiations, his tariff 50% on India comes after multiple rounds of talks with India. How does all of that leave India-US ties moving forward?
I think fraud. It's very counterproductive what the president is doing. It's alienating a natural partner in the Indo-Pacific, which is India. You need India if you want to contain and blunt and balance against China. He's pushing India further into the BRICS camp, and India has been, of course, opposed to China's de-dollarization program and whatnot. So he's alienating the countries that he needs from a geopolitical perspective. He's also alienating the Indian diaspora in the United States, which is a very powerful constituency, which historically has voted Democrat Party, but under Trump was drifting towards the Republican Party, and now we see that being reversed. So what he's doing is very counterproductive, both domestically and internationally both geopolitically and geoeconomically. But those are the times we're in, and it would take somebody with a much more capacious and vivid imagination to reimagine a global trading order, which everybody kind of buys into. He simply lacks that capability because at the end of the day, he's a real estate mogul.
Right, Professor Latham, thank you so much for joining us here on WION World with your insights.
Great pleasure.